I'm Dave Catlin, and this is my presentation at the 16th Robots in Education conference held at Thessaloniki on the 23rd, 25th of April 2025. My topic is assessment for learning with a focus on success criteria. I'll start with a brief history of educational robots, and then I'll present a problem, how assessment for learning can help resolve this, and then focus on specific examples of success criteria. The first robot was Seymour Papert Turtle in January 1970. By the early 80s, commercial robots started to go into schools. I started designing robots in 1983. Then in the late 80s, the UK government ran a national educational robot research project. It took place over 15 months, involved 350 schools and 20 school districts. The results were so positive that they've included the use of educational robots in the national curriculum, and they've kept it there in every single revision since. The point is that the teaching profession has had 30 to 45 years of experience of using robots in classrooms. The problem is you can take a teacher, give them a robot and an activity, and they get great results. Another teacher, same robot, same activity, similar kind of situation, and it's a complete flop. I want to know why. Dylan William, whom I talk about later, once said you can only describe a classroom by chaos theory. And he's right. The butterfly flapping its wings could be anything that happens in the playground or at home. Children's mood is even affected by the weather. I spent a lot of time observing lessons, and I was always amazed at how teachers intuitively and instantly made decisions about how to deal with situations. When I asked them how they did that, they couldn't tell me. I spent years trying to find out, but I couldn't discern a pattern. It became clear that it didn't depend upon the circumstances, it did depend upon the teacher. There's a network of Queen Elizabeth parks throughout the Commonwealth. Here we have an example of a Ugandan teacher doing a fantastic lesson in the Queen Elizabeth Country Park in southern England. Then, back at home, in Queen Elizabeth Safari Park in his small village school, radically different circumstances, but a brilliant lesson. Teachers who can adapt to circumstances succeed with robots. Those that plough on with a lesson plan, irrespective of whether the children are learning anything, struggle. It still left the question about how do teachers make those decisions. I recently came across this work by Smith and Kahneman. They actually got a Nobel Prize for this. In his book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, Kahneman gives an example of a fire chief who attends a fire. Now, it's a complicated process. There's a whole bunch of procedures that they should consider, but he doesn't do that. He quickly assesses the situations and makes a decision about what to do. Fire chief made an expert decision, and in the book How People Learn, they made a study of expertise. And one of the standout characteristics was the ability to access solutions quickly. The Gordon Skill Ladder provides a model of how people transform from complete ignorance to expert through various stages, from being completely ignorant to being aware of your incompetence to becoming aware of your competence, but you end up an expert. At that stage, you've internalized all your experience. It's become intuitive, which explains why teachers couldn't tell me how they were doing these things. This is a training model I use, the journey from the untrained red zone to the fully trained green zone. It's obvious that in most cases teachers need the technology training. They also need to transform the way people teach, particularly sit them down and tell them traditionalists. While I couldn't find a pattern, Professors Black and William could. Their work on assessment for learning, published in what was essentially a small pamphlet and supported later on by lots of other work, provided me with the model that I needed. The black box is the classroom. Governments know what resources they put into schools and what they get out in terms of SATs or A levels or whatever system you use. But what goes on inside a classroom is not something they know about. They provided a framework and a number of techniques which enabled teachers to manage a lesson and maximise the students' learning. This is the fourth paper I've published on how we can use this work to maximise the effectiveness of educational robots. The first provided a general overview, and the second was about learning intentions. Learning intentions are not the same as lesson objectives. Curriculum speak confuses kids. One thing that I did learn from teachers is that their first aim was to get children engaged in the lesson. And once they've got them engaged, they can tell you what they're learning in their own words. Success criteria is the focus of this paper. The research project that I mentioned earlier, teachers in those days didn't know anything about educational robots. One of the standout results was the fact that teachers could stand back and listen to children talking and learning from each other. They were amazed. Peer assessment is a major feature of educational robots. Finally, we got to success criteria. Ian Smith's book on assessment for learning is a decent book, but I think we can do a lot better with success criteria. He suggests that learning process is a better way than learning facts. In this example, he shows the process of learning to find the area of a triangle. For me, a better way is to give children a square piece of paper. They know the area of a square by that stage, get them to fold it in two, and ask them to work out a formula for the area. It's better because it's a hands-on activity, and that's where robots excel. So let's look at some examples. Maple Cross is a school in northwest London. It's within a 15-kilometre radius of 5 studios who've made Star Wars movies, and one of the studios had got a new contract. The teacher wanted to cover the topics of design technology, English language, and some coding, which he chose Roma to do that with. So he decided to let the children make their own Star Wars movie. They created their version of Mos Eisley, which is where the bar scene happened in the first movie. They made stick puppet robot characters, they wrote the script and filmed the movie. So what does success look like? Well, sometimes it's obvious because it works. And as Papa said, that's a new type of evidence. And if it doesn't work, you learn by debugging it. I found this next example in a 1994 publication from an American teaching association. The teacher had just acquired a classic robot and she was introducing it to the children with an activity where she wanted them to learn to go backwards and forwards. The robot had become a tractor and it was delivering food to animal pens. In the next lesson, she was going to introduce turning, but before she knew it, the children had already taken that step. They were making the robot turn. This is a common occurrence with educational robots. Not only do they go beyond the lesson plan, but they go way beyond the curriculum, and the teacher has to make a decision, am I going to let them do it? It is an example of children taking charge of their own learning. The teacher has to adjust her planning, and it's extra work. However, in the long run, it saves time because it's an improved and more efficient learning environment. You're working with students who want to learn. In the 90s, we pioneered a lot of activities with robots on number lines. A lot of these have right and wrong answers. However, there's more to it. Mathematician John Wallis introduced the idea of number lines in his 1685 book on algebra. Up and down a number line primarily to help him understand negative number arithmetic. He was what Papa called playing turtle, using his body to help him understand ideas. And that's what children are doing. They're developing spatial, kinesthetic and visual models of mathematical ideas. But more than that, they're building a foundation of experience which we technically call prior knowledge. They get experiences of things like the commutative laws of arithmetic, of equivalence. We've even had children as young as 5 discovering negative numbers. For those who are familiar with Papa's work, you'll recall his anecdote about gears and how he loved playing with them when he was a 2-year-old. Building a mental model, which as a teen helped him understand algebra with 2 variables. As he recalls, any educator watching the 2-year-old play with gears would not have seen anything happening. Hidden success is a common experience with educational robots. This is a simplified version of an activity called number grab. Students have to grab as many numbers as they can in 2 minutes. So they could go from 1 then to 5. But they only count if they get the numbers back to the start. So they go back to 1 and then to the start and score 7. and then they can set off again. Alternatively, they can get to 5 and then oscillate between 5 and 4 before making a break back home. So on one level, success is did they count correctly? And on another level, did they win the competition against the other teams? However, you could pose a question in a way where you ask them, can you find a better way to do it before you actually program the robot? So, for example, they could find the ratio of points scored to distance travelled. In this context, success is the development of their mathematical thinking. There's all sorts of numbers you can play with and much more complex courses. In this activity, students had to make their robots into a dog and then program them to behave like a dog. The arts and crafts makerspace aspects of projects like this are fascinating. You can see the students' ambition, their creativity and determination to make the robot that they envision. The student who made the dog on the bottom right wanted to make its tail wag, not just a rigid, stiff motion, but as it moved around, it would naturally move. It took a long time to find the right material that allowed him to do that. Another student, instead of making her dog sniff around trees, she made it chase its tail. When students are setting the targets, success criteria becomes pretty obvious. The teacher finished this activity with a dog show where the students had to explain what they'd done and why they'd done it. Show and tell is another effective way of determining success. Those activities can be done in different ways and you can scaffold them so that students develop their skills gradually. The bus project is a good example of this. The Foundation made the project into a design technology task where students had to create the buses, create the houses and roads and program the robot to travel around them. Students in the middle had added bus stops. 14-year-old students on the right had a much more sophisticated task. Their map had factories, sports stadiums, houses, hospitals. It was an exercise in practical statistics. They had to find out how long does it take people to get on and off of buses? How does the traffic change throughout the day? What information do you need to write a timetable? The exercise also extended into a debate about the ethical use of statistics. I believe that Assessment for Learning has a lot to offer. Unfortunately, the government decided it wanted to know what was going on in the black box. So they loaded teachers with a huge amount of extra bureaucracy as they tried to micromanage the lessons. Utterly stupid. I engaged with the teacher in a chat room, and when I'd mentioned Assessment for Learning, he got very angry because he'd been marked down by a school inspector because he hadn't written down a learning intention on a blackboard at the beginning of a lesson. The guy was working to a checklist. He knew nothing about the subject. This happened at CNFEI in Paris. They had a teenage student who'd been brain damaged in a car accident and he could no longer do basic arithmetic. However, he got very angry when they tried to reteach him the basics. So they gave him a Roman activity where he had to use arithmetic and he realised he couldn't do it. He then became amenable to their efforts. Could you imagine trying to set that as a learning intention at the start of an activity? Assessment for learning is a set of heuristics. It's not a procedure where you need to do first step, second step, third step, fourth step. Like all heuristics, you need to use it when appropriate. When working with educational robots, students normally work in groups. I need to understand more about the dynamics of group work. In the course of working on this paper, I suddenly became aware that there's a strong connection between success criteria and Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. This is an area that I intend to explore in more detail. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.